It all began when I moved into the old west wing of the college hostel. Now this part of the hostel wasn't like the others. The rooms were smaller, the walls were thin, and it just had an overall eerie vibe. A lot of students avoided that area. They said it was haunted, that strange noises and whispers came from one particular room, room 309. But to be honest, I didn't believe any of it. I thought those were just stories people made up to scare the new guys. It wasn't the first time I'd heard things like that. College life was full of rumors after all, so when I got assigned to stay there, I shrugged it off. But the first night in the room, I felt an odd chill in the air. It wasn't anything too alarming, just an uncomfortable cold that wouldn't go away. I tried to ignore it and settled into bed. My roommate Raj was already asleep, snoring away. I pulled the blanket up, closed my eyes, and tried to get some sleep after a long day of settling in. But then, around midnight, I heard it. A soft whisper. It was faint at first, almost like my mind was playing tricks on me. But it came again. This time, it was clearer. "Help me." The voice was so quiet, I could barely make it out. I sat up in bed, looking around the room, but everything seemed fine. Raj was still asleep, the sound wasn't coming from him. The room felt completely still, except for that strange chill. I brushed it off, telling myself it was probably the wind outside or the house settling. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me after a long day. So I lay back down, trying to forget about it. But then it happened again, louder this time. "Help me." My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't imagining it. This time I was awake enough to realize that the whisper wasn't coming from outside, or from Raj, or from anywhere normal. It was coming from the wall beside my bed. It was as if someone was speaking directly into my ear, only there was no one there. My skin started to crawl. I sat up and pressed my ear against the wall, trying to listen more carefully. But the whispering stopped. I waited for a while, but nothing else happened that night. The room was silent again, and I eventually managed to fall asleep, though not without a lot of tossing and turning. The feeling of something being there, just out of sight, lingered with me the rest of the night. The next day, I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a weird experience, nothing more. But when I mentioned it to Raj in the morning, he just laughed it off. He wasn't concerned at all. He said it was probably the wind, or maybe I had heard a mouse, or something. Raj was a pretty laid-back guy, not one to believe in spooky stories. But I couldn't get rid of the feeling, that voice. It kept echoing in my mind, and by the next night, the whispers returned. This time they were louder, more insistent. I couldn't ignore it anymore. And then, in the middle of the night, I heard it again. This time, it was different. It wasn't just a whisper anymore. The voice clearly said my name, in a low, cold tone. "Help me, your name," it said. I froze. It was like the air in the room thickened, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. My entire body felt stiff, like I was paralyzed with fear. I looked around. Raj was still asleep, oblivious to everything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was in the room with us. The whispers had singled me out. From that moment, I couldn't just ignore it anymore. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong in that room. It was like I was being drawn into something I couldn't escape. It wasn't just a nightmare, it wasn't just the wind, it was something else. Something real. Something I couldn't explain, no matter how hard I tried. And that was just the beginning. The whispering was just the first clue that room 309 wasn't as empty as it seemed. Something, or someone, was waiting, watching, and the whispers were just the start. After hearing the whispers, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong with room 309. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination running wild, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Raj, my roommate, wasn't really taking it seriously. He just laughed when I told him about the voices, brushing it off as if it were some kind of joke. He insisted it was probably just the wind or maybe even rats running around in the walls. But I couldn't ignore it. The whispers were too real, too specific. They weren't just random sounds. They were speaking directly to me, calling out my name. The next day, I couldn't focus on anything. I kept thinking about that room, the whispers, the feeling of being watched. I had to know more. I had to find out what was going on, so I started asking around. I wasn't expecting much, just some casual gossip about a room everyone avoided. But what I learned shook me to my core. One of the old janitors, a grumpy guy named Mr. Gupta, must have seen something in my eyes when I asked about room 309. At first, he ignored me, muttering something about not wanting to get involved in the newcomer's nonsense. But as I pressed him more, he finally gave in, glancing nervously over his shoulder like he was afraid someone might overhear. He told me something that I'll never forget. He said room 309 had a dark history, one that no one really talked about. 10 years ago, a girl named Nisha had lived in that room. She was a student at the college, just like us, but her time in that room ended tragically. According to Mr. Gupta, Nisha had jumped out of the window one night. There were whispers among the staff that she'd been driven to it by something in that room, something that wouldn't let her leave. What disturbed me even more was what Mr. Gupta said next. He mentioned that people believed it wasn't just a suicide. Some said there was someone, that pushed her. Something in room 309 had been after her, and once she was gone, the room had been sealed off. After her death, they locked the door and kept it that way. No one was allowed in anymore, not even maintenance. It was as if the room had been cursed, and the people in charge had decided that it should be left alone. That was when I began to feel a chill in the pit of my stomach. I was already living in that room. I was already hearing the whispers. What if Nisha hadn't just ended her life? What if the thing that had taken her was still there, still waiting for someone else to enter? I couldn't get the thought out of my head. That night, I made a decision. I was going to see room 309 for myself. I wasn't going to just stand by and let the fear control me. If there was something in that room, something that could whisper to me and make me feel like I was going mad, I had to know what it was. I wasn't going to let it win. I waited until everyone was asleep. The hostel was quiet, the lights dim, and most people were in bed. That was when I decided to act. I knew where the janitor kept his keys, and after making sure no one was around, I slipped into his office. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the bunch of keys hanging from the wall. I walked through the hallways, my footsteps echoing in the silence. When I reached room 309, I stood in front of the door for a long time, my heart hammering in my chest. It looked ordinary enough, old, dusty, with a faded number 309 painted on the wood, but there was something about it that made my skin crawl. The lock was rusted, but the key turned smoothly in the door. With a creak, the door swung open, and I stepped inside. The room was as cold as a tomb. The air was thick, and there was a musty smell that filled my nose. It was empty just like I expected, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, something watching me. I shone my flashlight around, scanning the room. It was dark, the only light coming from my shaky beam. My eyes fell on the window, the one where Nisha had supposedly jumped. I could feel a strange pressure in the air, like the room itself was holding its breath. That's when I heard it, the faintest whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I realized it was the same voice I had heard in my own room, the same voice that had called my name. It whispered once again, softly, almost pleading. My heart raced, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, my body unwilling to leave, as if something was telling me to stay. The air grew even colder and the whispers grew louder, until they filled the entire room. I turned to leave, but something stopped me. Something was telling me to look down. As I glanced at the floor, my eyes locked onto something half buried under the old carpet. A diary. I reached for it, my hands trembling. I didn't know why, but I had to have it. I grabbed it, stuffed it into my bag, and fled the room. I didn't know what I had just walked into, but I was certain of one thing. Room 309 was not just an empty space. The night I entered room 309 changed everything. I couldn't get it out of my mind. The whispers had been growing louder, the air more oppressive, and the weight of the room seemed to follow me even after I'd left. But what really haunted me was the diary I'd found under the carpet. I couldn't stop thinking about it. There had to be something in there that explained everything. The whispers, the chilling cold, and the feeling of being watched. It was my only chance to understand what was going on. That night, after Raj had gone to sleep, I couldn't wait any longer. I pulled the diary out of my bag, my hands shaking as I opened it. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded with time, but the writing was still legible. The first few entries were normal enough. Nisha had written about her classes, her friends, and the usual college stuff. But then, as I turned the pages, the tone began to shift. Her writing became erratic, frantic, almost as if she was slowly losing control of her thoughts. One entry described how she started hearing strange noises at night, whispers that seemed to come from the walls. The way she wrote about it made my skin crawl. She talked about feeling cold hands on her shoulders when no one was there, of things moving around in the room when her back was turned. She seemed to think it was just her imagination at first, but as time went on, the entries became darker. There was a particular entry that stood out. Nisha wrote that she started seeing things in the corner of her eye, shadows that didn't belong, figures moving in the darkness, figures that would disappear the moment she turned her head. But what really sent a chill down my spine was when she mentioned someone else being in the room with her. She described a presence, an oppressive force that made it hard to breathe, something that followed her wherever she went. She said it wasn't just haunting her, it was feeding off her fear. The more I read, the more I understood. Nisha had been driven to the edge. She was terrified, trapped in a room that was alive with something dark. But it wasn't just the room itself that had taken hold of her. It was the thing that lived in it. The whispers, the shadows, the pressure in the air, it was all connected. Nisha had known it, and now I was starting to feel it too. The diary spoke of an overwhelming sense of dread that would build over time, until a person could no longer tell what was real and what was in their mind. Nisha had written about her fear of falling asleep, because every time she did, she would wake up to something worse. It was as if the room didn't want her to leave. I couldn't help but read on. Her final entries were the hardest to get through. She wrote about hearing a voice that called her name in the dead of night, a voice that wasn't her own. It was a voice that promised release, freedom from the horror of the room. But Nisha had known better. She wrote that she had tried to leave several times, but every time she went to the door, she would hear the voice again, telling her to stay, that she had no choice. The last thing she wrote was chilling. If you're reading this, get out. Get out before it finds you too. By the time I finished reading the diary, my heart was racing. The weight of her words settled in my chest like a stone. It was as if Nisha was speaking directly to me, warning me about something that I didn't understand but was already too close to. I looked at the clock, midnight. My room felt colder than usual, and I could hear Raj's quiet breathing, still asleep in his bed. But I felt anything but safe. I tried to calm myself, to tell myself that Nisha's fear had just gotten the best of her. Maybe she had just been imagining things, just like I had thought at first. But then I heard it. That voice. Faint at first, but growing louder. A whisper from the walls. Help me. I froze. It wasn't in my head, it was real. And it was calling me by name, just like it had called Nisha. My blood ran cold, and the room seemed to close in on me. I could feel the same pressure she had described, the feeling of being trapped, of being watched. It wasn't just the room that was haunted, it was something in it, something that wanted us to stay, to never leave. I rushed to my feet, panic setting in as I grabbed the diary and shoved it back into my bag. The whispers didn't stop. They were louder now, and I could feel them circling around me. I looked at Raj, still sleeping soundly, but I knew I couldn't stay here another second. I had to leave. I grabbed my jacket and bolted out of the room, my heart racing as I ran down the hall. I didn't stop until I was outside in the fresh air, but even then, the whispers lingered in my mind. I didn't know what to do next, but one thing was clear. I couldn't ignore this anymore. The room, the whispers, the diary, they were all connected, and I had to find out what happened to Nisha before it was too late for me too. The moment I stepped out of the room, I thought I was free, but the whispering never left me. I could still hear it in my ears like a faint buzzing, no matter where I went. I thought getting away from room 309 would bring some peace, but it didn't. The air still felt thick, heavy, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, the girl from the mirror. It was as if she was following me. It wasn't just a feeling. It was real. Her face, pale and gaunt, would appear when I least expected it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning over everything I had learned about room 309, about Nisha, about what was happening to me. I pulled the diary back out of my bag. I had to read more. I couldn't ignore it any longer. There had to be something in there, some clue that would make sense of it all, something that would tell me how to stop whatever was happening. I flipped through the pages, the words now more frantic, more desperate. Nisha's entries had grown more and more disturbing. She wrote about the mirror in room 309, the one that seemed to have a life of its own. She described seeing something in it, something that wasn't there when she looked away. A face, pale and hollow, staring at her from the reflection. It wasn't just the mirror, though. Nisha wrote that it wasn't just a physical thing. It was like the room itself was alive, feeding off her fear, growing stronger with every passing day. One entry caught my eye, and I had to read it twice to believe it. Nisha had written about seeing someone else in the mirror, not just the face of the girl that haunted her, but a presence, a dark figure standing behind her. She said the figure would move, but only in the reflection, never in the room itself. The way she described it made my stomach turn. She said that the figure would slowly raise its hand, reaching for her, as if it was trying to pull her into the mirror. Nisha mentioned something else, something that made my blood run cold. She said the room itself was like a trap, a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead had blurred. The room wasn't just haunted, it was a doorway, a portal. Something in the room was connecting this world to something darker, something that shouldn't be allowed to cross over. And whatever was there had latched onto her, feeding on her fear until she had no choice but to obey. I couldn't keep reading. My head was spinning, and I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. It was as though the more I learned, the more I became tangled in whatever had trapped Nisha. I had to know more. I had to find out what happened to her, how she died, and why the room was still cursed. But the answers weren't in the diary, they were somewhere else, somewhere I had to go. I couldn't shake the thought of the mirror. The mirror that Nisha had written about, the one that seemed to trap her. It was the one place in room 309 that hadn't changed. Everything else in the room was old, decaying, but the mirror was different. It was the one thing that seemed untouched by time. I decided I had to go back. I had to face the mirror, confront whatever was in that room. I couldn't keep running. I had already been marked, just like Nisha had. The whispers, the face in the mirror, the feeling of being followed, it was all part of it. I had to go back to room 309 and see it with my own eyes. That night, after Raj had fallen asleep, I sneaked back to the hostel. My heart was pounding in my chest as I made my way to the west wing, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls. I knew I was taking a huge risk, but I couldn't stop now. I had to understand. I had to break the cycle before it consumed me too. When I reached room 309, I hesitated. The door was still locked, but I had the key. My hand shook as I slid it into the lock and turned. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. It was exactly as I remembered. Cold, dark, and still. But this time, I didn't feel like I was alone. The air was heavier, thicker, and the whispers were louder now. They seemed to swirl around me, coming from all directions. I could feel them crawling under my skin. I turned my flashlight toward the mirror. It stood there, reflecting nothing but empty space. But I could feel its presence, its pull. Something was waiting behind it, watching. I took a step closer, my breath shallow. And that's when I saw it. A shadow in the reflection, standing behind me. Not just a shadow, a figure. The same girl I'd seen in my dreams, the one who had been haunting me. She was there in the mirror, staring at me with hollow eyes. I turned quickly, but there was no one behind me. I looked back at the mirror. The girl was still there. Her face was closer now, her hand outstretched, as if she was reaching for me. That's when I realized she wasn't just in the mirror. She was waiting for me. She wasn't trapped in the glass. I was. The room, the mirror, it was all part of a trap, and now it had me. The moment I saw her in the mirror, my entire body froze. The girl's face was so close now, her hollow eyes staring straight at me. The air in the room grew even colder, and I felt a wave of panic surge through me. I tried to back away, but it was as if the mirror was pulling me in, like gravity was working against me. My feet felt heavy, as if the floor beneath me was sinking into darkness. I had to leave, but I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. Her hand was reaching for me now, just inches from the glass. I felt a cold draft rush past me, as if the space behind the mirror was opening up. The whispers had turned into a deafening roar, filling my head, urging me to step forward. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I looked around the room, desperate for something to anchor me to reality. The walls seemed to close in, and I could feel the oppressive weight of the room pushing down on me. Everything felt wrong, like I was trapped in a nightmare that wouldn't end. But then something snapped inside me. I remembered what Nisha had written in her diary. She had described this feeling of being trapped between the world of the living and something darker, something otherworldly. She had fought it, tried to escape, but it had consumed her. I wasn't going to let it consume me too. With every ounce of strength I had left, I tore my eyes away from the mirror. I forced myself to focus on the door, on the way out. But just as I turned to leave, I heard it, a loud crash, like glass shattering. I spun around, heart racing, and saw the mirror crack down the middle. The glass splintered, but there was no reflection of me, no reflection of anything, just an empty void, and through the cracks I could see something moving. The shadow in the mirror was no longer just a shadow. It had taken shape, forming into something darker, more defined. I could see the figure now, the girl's face, twisted and contorted, with hollow eyes that seemed to reach into my soul. She was no longer just a reflection. She was coming out of the mirror. I staggered back, my mind racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. The room was supposed to be cursed, yes, but no one had told me the room itself could pull someone in like this. Nisha had written about the figure, but I never imagined it would become real, that it would come for me. I had to get out. I knew the door was my only escape, but the girl in the mirror wasn't letting me go. She was moving toward me, her face twisting into a grotesque smile, her hand reaching out. My heart was pounding in my chest, and every instinct in me screamed to run. I lunged for the door, grabbing the handle and yanking it open, but just as I stepped through, I felt something cold wrap around my ankle. I looked down, horrified, as a black, shadowy tendril shot out from the mirror, wrapping tightly around my leg. The force of it yanked me back toward the room, pulling me toward the mirror. I kicked and struggled, my hands grasping at the doorframe, but the shadow was too strong. With everything I had, I screamed, pulling and thrashing, and finally, something inside me broke free. In one desperate movement, I wrenched myself away from the shadow and stumbled out of the room, slamming the door behind me. For a moment, everything was still. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my body shaking from the adrenaline. The whispers had stopped, the pressure had lifted, and I was outside. I was free. But that sense of freedom didn't last. I knew something deep down, that I hadn't escaped. The room, the mirror, it wasn't done with me. It had already marked me. It had already claimed me. I ran back to my room, my mind spinning. When I got back, Raj was still asleep, oblivious to everything that had happened. I collapsed onto my bed, shaking, breathing heavily. I tried to tell myself it was over, that I had made it out, but I couldn't. I could still feel the presence of that girl in the mirror, still hear her whispers, now softer, but still persistent in my mind. I thought about Nisha's final warning in her diary, "Get out before it finds you too." The thing in that room wasn't finished. It had wanted her. It had wanted me, and I knew it would never stop until it got what it wanted. The next day, I packed my things. I didn't tell Raj or anyone else what had happened. There was no point. No one would believe me. The college would never admit what had really happened in that room. I wasn't even sure if anyone had ever made it out alive. As I walked away from the hostel, I kept glancing back. I couldn't help it. I had to know that I was really free, that the room wouldn't come after me. But I knew deep down that it wouldn't stop. It would find someone else, just like it had found Nisha and me. Room 309 was a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead didn't exist. It was a place where the darkness never truly left, and even though I had escaped, I knew I'd never forget the whispers, the mirror, the girl, and the fear that followed me every step of the way.